Hello, everyone. We're going to go into chapter 5 here. I'm doing this the same day I'm doing chapter 4. Um, yeah, so let's do it. I want to get through it quick. I think to do this, I am going to quick cover a video. Um, no crud. Yeah, excuse me. I am going to try to cover a video quick here. No, that's not what I want. No, that is the wrong history. That is the history I want. We're going to watch a quick video on Porter's Five Forces. Sorry if you're hearing audio here. We're going to share a video and watch through it quick. It's like a 4-minute video. I think it does a good job of explaining Michael Porter's 4 or 5 generic strategies when we're talking strategy. The reason I want to show the video is I think I've said this before. I really struggle with Porter's generic strategies. And the reason I struggle with it is because I think Value Disciplines by Tracy and Wiersma explain it gets to the point a lot quicker than the generic strategies. Maybe I'm just an idiot, but when I watch it, it just does not register for me. Um, and it's it's not a complex thing. So let's watch it together. Try to get my share screen up here. We'll go through it. I'll comment. I'll probably go into the value disciplines thing um, a little bit. We're just trying to get to the point of though Porter's generic strategies because chapter 5 is discussing that. So give me 1 second here to share. Well, yep, we know that one. There we go. Share sound, optimize for video sharing. All right. And come on, here we go.
This mini lecture provides a brief introduction to the 4 generic strategies that companies can utilize in their efforts to realize competitive advantages. Before I introduce the 4 generic strategies, however, I want to make sure we are clear on what a competitive advantage is and the key levers a company can pull to achieve an advantage. For the purposes of this lecture, a competitive advantage is when a company achieves higher profits than the average competitor in the product market. Consider 2 companies that have similar revenues and similar costs, and therefore similar profits. Well, the focal firm can achieve a competitive advantage in one of 2 ways. First, this company can somehow drop costs while keeping revenues constant. In this case, the focal firm now achieves a competitive advantage due to lower cost.
Now, I really like this first part of it because it breaks down the idea of what it is you're trying to achieve as a business. So you have both your revenue stream, you have an income statement, you have money coming in, revenue coming in, and then you have costs that are going out. Very much systems theory, and that makes sense. That's perfect. Um, then you get into, well, then what levers do you have to pull? And one of them is, well, you could try to cut costs. Another lever you could pull or press or hit or whatever is try to increase revenue. Um, in either case, you're going to try to increase profits, but you have 2 different levers you can now pull. That makes perfect sense. Going to the rest.
Second, the focal firm can increase revenues while holding costs constant. In this case, the focal firm now achieves a competitive advantage due to higher revenues. Of course, a company could realize an even greater advantage if it could somehow do both, but that is very difficult to do in practice. Now, this brief overview may seem obvious, but it is important to lay the groundwork for the following discussion. Michael Porter suggested that generic strategies can be defined by 2 key dimensions: the scope of the strategy and the source of the competitive advantage. For scope, the company could target a broad market or a narrow focused market. For the source of competitive advantage, the company could either be the low-cost leader or a differentiator. The result is these 4 quadrants that represent the 4 generic strategies: overall cost leadership, differentiation, cost focus, and differentiation focus. Cost leadership is really about being the low-cost provider for a broad customer base. Examples of companies that do this include Dell Computer, Amazon.com, and Walmart. These companies all offer products that are pretty similar to other products in the marketplace, but they have lower costs. These low costs allow them to consistently capture higher profits than their competitors. Differentiation is really about doing something different that makes your broad market customers willing to pay more for your products and services. Examples of companies that do this include Harley-Davidson and Apple. These companies offer products that customers really want, and so customers are willing to pay high prices for them. These higher prices allow these companies to consistently capture higher profits than their competitors. Cost focus is basically a cost leadership strategy in a narrow or focused market. Aldi is a great example of a focused cost leader. Aldi targets a very narrow and extremely price-sensitive customer, but only carries the products they can offer at a huge discount. They strategically locate close to traditional supermarkets so that these penny-pinching extreme customers can still go somewhere close by to get the other things they need that Aldi doesn't carry. Differentiation focus is basically a differentiation strategy in a narrow or focused market. Ducati motorcycles is a great example. They target a narrow slice of performance-focused motorcycle enthusiasts. Ferrari is another example. They target performance-focused drivers who have millions to play with. So generally, you can select any one of these 4 generic strategies in your efforts to achieve a competitive advantage. It is very difficult, however, to try to do more than one. Companies that try to do more than one frequently get stuck in the middle. You see, when you cut costs aggressively, then you also tend to cut product features and services. Thus, it is very hard to clearly differentiate your product when you are aggressively pursuing a low-cost strategy. At the same time, you often have to spend money to make your product somehow better than the other products out there. Doing so is clearly inconsistent with a cost leadership strategy. The main activities you engage in to become a cost leader are simply inconsistent in most cases with the main activities you engage in to be a differentiator. Getting stuck in the middle is a pretty unhappy place to be. Your products aren't different enough for customers to be willing to pay more, but they also aren't cheap enough for customers to choose you for your bargain prices. You are left without any clear unique value for the customers you're trying to woo. So while some companies have in fact found ways to do both, it is usually wise to choose one and stick with it. Understanding when some companies are able to do both is a topic for another mini lecture.
Okay, go ahead and do the stop share there. So 100% agree with that. I don't know why Michael Porter, though, and I don't know the man, so I'm not going to probably ask him why he did scope in source and why he put all of that in there. To me, that's like a matrix that doesn't need to be a matrix. The whole point of it is to tell you, don't get stuck in the middle. And to me, value disciplines explains that quite well. So let's jump in. All right, and go to our master strategy tools document thingamabobber just to cover it one more time. So Michael Treacy and Fred Wiersma, I think I got the names right finally. Um, I did. In their book, Discipline of Market Leaders, 1995, discovered that when they analyzed companies that were the market leaders in different industries, different markets, they found that those companies would usually go in one of these 3 directions. Lately, they've added a third one, which was locational excellence. I'll, I, I, depending on the day, I like that one and I don't like that one. I think it actually is becoming much more prevalent, especially when you think of a world where we have Amazon. Um, let's see, there we go, where we have Amazon and you can literally buy anything low priced or high priced or any price on there and have it delivered to your door. Uh, Versus why would you get that versus why would you go to Walmart? And I think that locational speed of which you're getting it source might be important. When you're hungry, you don't have 2 days to wait for, um, some meal service delivered on Amazon. And who knows, maybe they have something faster these days, but whatever. So My point simply is, to me, it makes a lot more sense to, instead of doing scope and source, to say, hey, people buy these products usually based on one reason. Either they're trying to get the best product or best feature or something like that, or they're trying to get the cheapest thing. They don't care. Maybe it's not being used very much, so the cheapest will work. They'll use it 3 times and throw it away anyway, so it doesn't matter. Or there's some middle ground of value and or cost and price that if a company would just figure that out in that sweet spot, then you would have best of both worlds. And then you have customer service or customer intimacy. The reason you put the best of both worlds in the customer intimacy is because noticing that or paying attention to that is equivalent to finding that sweet spot. And the only way to find that sweet spot is to pay attention to your customers, and figuring out what they want. So in chapter 5, we're talking about these 5 generic strategies, or four. Sometimes they say three. It doesn't matter. What you need to remember goes back to the story that I told you with the value disciplines in my consulting work. When I have 10 managers in a room, or seven, or however many it is, and I ask, well, why are people buying your product? And they're all saying something different. Then you have the founder of the company in the same room that's looking at him, and it like the revelation of, oh goodness, that's the problem. They don't know why we exist. And we don't talk about this very often. Most of the time, we just think it's assumed. But imagine if you have 1,000 people working for you, and you have, let's just keep the number simple, you have 30 managers and directors and overseers of those 1,000 employees, and they're all going in a different direction. They're all saying, well, we need to take care of the customer. And another one saying they don't care if they're getting taken care of. They just want the lowest priced product or service out there. Just give them the low price and we're good. And then somebody else says, no, they want the best product or they want the best customer service. Imagine hearing that argument in the boardroom and everybody's like, well, those are all good things. Which one do we pick? And then somebody says, well, it should be a balance of each one of those things. Yeah, but that doesn't usually work. And it definitely makes it almost impossible for a company to position itself, which is why we're doing this in the first place. We're trying to get it so we are a leader in one of those capacities, one of those 3 or 4 capacities, in order that when people think of, I don't know, cheap products where you can buy everything from tires to T-bones, then the first thing that pops in their mind is Walmart. Where else would you go to get tires and T-bones in the same place? So that's really what we're kind of getting to with chapter 5 and its discussion on the 5 generic strategies. I would like to get through it very quickly. I know I say that over and over again and I fail on almost every one of them, but we'll do the best we can because chapter 5 is only supposed to be discussing that. The other reason I don't like it, and I don't like why we have an entire chapter on this. My apologies. I can't. There. Oh, goodness. I'm sorry. Now let's escape. There we go. There's a reason I don't put it in slideshow view when I'm trying to share because it gets everything screwed up on my computer. My apologies. Okay, there we go. The other issue I have is when you have 5 generic competitive strategies and it basically looks like this. Um, I think you're adding way too much and not understanding the point of the whole thing, which is you don't really want to be in the middle because if you're fighting for the middle, you're going to lose on many fronts. Um, all right, learning objectives. Understand what distinguishes each of the 5 generic strategies and why some of the strategies work better in certain kinds of industries and competitive conditions than in others. Explain the major avenues for achieving competitive advantage based on lower cost. Explain the major, blah, 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 blah. Let's keep rocking and rolling. Um, Yeah, again, I don't know why we're writing all this stuff. Competitive strategy. This deals exclusively with the specifics of management's game plan for competing successfully and securing a particular competitive advantage over rivals that offers superior value to customers, strengthens its market position. I want you to pay attention to that term. That's why we're doing this. We want to position ourselves in the market with our customers in a certain manner that they come to us in a certain position. Okay. It goes back to you have a broad uh, or a low cost strategy that's focused on a broad category of people, or you want to have a higher cost strategy, but you're going after a narrow portion of the overall market. You're trying to position yourself. That's really what you're trying to get to. So the reason we do talk about it though is because every textbook on planet Earth, when it comes to strategic management, discusses Porter's five force, or not just Porter's five forces, the five generic strategies, and trying to figure out is our focus too broad or is it too narrow? Um, if we're trying to develop this sustainable competitive advantage, which one are we going after? Are we going after a cost strategy or are we going after a differentiated strategy, which is, uh, mind you, that doesn't mean diversified strategy. What it means is that we're going after um, a narrower group of overall people in the market. And let me turn that off, and then share because then you can see me. I like to see me. Okay, let's rock and roll. I'll try to go quick here. We've already talked about what a competitive strategy is. We just covered that. You watched a video. This gives you a better, um, it gives you more detail. I would offer, though, back to the video we just watched, which is a much better explanation, in my opinion, than what your textbook talks about. Here they offer uh, in the middle there, which I'll give them the credit for putting the middle one, the best cost provider strategy. The thing I don't like about it is they're saying that that can be kind of a sweet spot. No, it's usually not a sweet spot. It's usually a price war that you're going to have with a handful of other competitors. That's why you want to go after the one or the other, is because at the end of that war, yeah, well, there isn't a war because you're saying we're going to go over here, we're going to do it this way. And usually a competitor is going to say, well, if you're going over there, I'm going to go over here because I don't want to go head to head with you. And now you're serving the customer best, and each of you has your slice of the pie or the market share. When you have two competitors going for the best cost strategy, trying to figure out, well, how good of a quality do we need for X amount of price? And then once you get that quality, then what happens if you have a competitor is now you're just chopping the price down, trying to get more people. Um, and again, doesn't usually end very well. So for the most part, especially in managerial economics, we always talk, don't get into a price war. And now your book is just going to talk through the rest of this. Again, I think that Michael Porter's intent is well-meaning, but I think he convolutes it. Most of us can understand this much better through value disciplines. And then once you understand why you're doing it, then your next step, you don't necessarily have to sit here and read 55 different if-then statements to understand, well, when do I use it here? Because you can almost envision it. You can envision yourself being a specialty flower store in Brookings, South Dakota, and having a competitor, and why you don't want to have a price war with them. Maybe you want to focus on perennials and they want to focus on not perennials, but you don't want to go after each other. And then there's other issues looking at in the value chain. What are the cost drivers? Is this a highly manufactured item, or is it like selling steel beams or something where it's all the cost is all in the raw material? Um, and how do we deal with that? Again, I don't think I'm even going to test you on this stuff. This I will, though. So they talk about the cost drivers in the value chain. I want you to know what usually drives costs in most environments. Now, I'm going to warn you, this is usually for a manufacturing company. In fact, your textbooks are written where the most of what it sounds like we're talking about is like a Daktronics or a 3M. It's not talking as if it's necessarily the Brookings Health System or, Suval or Sanford Health System or a Vera McKinnon Health System. It, there's similar cost drivers in there, but there's not one dominant cost driver in there. Okay. Labor, for example, or overhead for a healthcare system would usually be a pretty huge driver of overall cost. So just remember these items have a tendency to have the biggest influence of the cost in the value chain. And I'm going to leave it at that. We're going to keep rocking and rolling. They talk about revamping the value chain and monkeying with it, so to speak, to try to maximize it to your advantage. Examples would be selling directly to consumers and cutting out the activities of distributors and middlemen, streamlining operations by limiting low value added or unnecessary work steps and activities in the value chain, trying to collaborate with suppliers to improve the efficiency by reducing maybe handling of materials, shipping, inventory costs. All of those are examples of trying to revamp the value chain to get get to a better end result. Vanguard is a financial services firm that's had really over the years done a great job of becoming the low cost producer of financial products. I believe I can't think of the guy's name who is the head of it, argued that the one of the reasons investors, and we're talking about a financial services firm, not stock valuations here, but they would offer mutual funds. And over time, I want to say Bogle, who is the CEO, realized that the reason people weren't receiving better results than what they were is 20% of the profits earned in the mutual fund were paid to the mutual fund managers. So what he realized is, well, why don't we just index this? Let's not try to go for the best and the greatest investments that make the most money, but maybe we'll just let a computer decide. And then all of a sudden, the management fees went down to nothing, and now people were making as much whether or not they invested in the best mutual fund or an average fund of some sort, because the 20% got added back to the Vanguard mutual fund. So um, they realized that there was something there in uh, the value chain that could be monkeyed with, so to speak, and with a better result. And Vanguard's one of the largest producers now. Um, they talk about when a low cost strategy works best. Well, if you have a high level of price competition, okay, in other words, everybody's competing on price. Okay, there's not one, or there is one that's going high, but they're not maybe doing very well. Then maybe a low cost strategy would work best. Um, you're in a commoditized, homogeneous environment where what you're selling is no different than what the person down the street is selling. In banks, for example, like it, love it or hate it, banks sell a commodity. That if you borrow $20,000 from Wells Fargo versus from First Bank and Trust, other than if you strip away the interest rate or the interest rate's the exact same, the money I get from First Bank and Trust is no different than the money I get from Wells Fargo. It can be done the same. So basically it's a commodity. Then all of them they have to compete at a certain level cost. Somewhere in the value chain, how they manage the rest of it, like the cost of their labor, their overhead, those types of things, if that can be managed because they don't have a choice but to compete on cost at some level. There aren't a lot of ways to have product differentiation. Buyers are highly price sensitive, and industry newcomers can successfully introduce introductory low prices to attract buyers and build a customer based airline. Once they deregulated the airline industry and you had these low cost carriers coming in, if you were to take a United flight from Denver to New York, or you took a Allegiant flight from Denver to New York, and the Allegiant flight cost $150, but the United flight cost $500, Okay, maybe you're not getting a meal on the Allegiant, but who cares if it's 3 hours in either capacity? Aren't you going to want to save the $350? So, that was a great way for these newcomers to come in and compete right away because you're doing a very similar thing. Um, Again, I don't want to hit you on a lot of these. Can't imagine I'm going to test you on these, but when you get ready to take an exam, make sure you read through chapter 5 PowerPoints. Oh, goodness. Okay. Yeah, we're going to fly through this one. Uh, Maybe take a print screen of this one. I like this one. These are all the examples of differentiation. So if you imagine in the value disciplines, you have the three options. Let's add in the fourth one, which is locational excellence. The real thing we're looking for is, well, which ones are not trying to compete on a low cost producer, huge service sort of category. What are the other ones? So, what are the customer intimate ways of competing? What are the product leadership ways of competing? So, in the differentiation box, here's all the ways that, other than cost, these companies compete. So, Red Bull, uh, competes on a certain taste, flavor, and a high level of caffeine, or it used to. Microsoft Office, Apple Watch, they have different features that people want. Home Depot and Amazon have the widest selection. And you might think, well, wouldn't that be a cost strategy, Bruce, because they're cheap? Yeah, but you can actually go to Home Depot and or Amazon, either one, and buy the same thing that you get at the other. One of the reasons I go to Home Depot is not necessarily it is extraordinarily cheap, but usually if I'm going there and going to Sioux Falls to shop at Home Depot, it's because I don't need one thing. It's because I need 37 things to do a house project or something, and I know Lowe's probably is not going to have it, up to and including maybe a door or door frame windows a certain way. Um, they have a much bigger selection at Home Depot. Uh, Service, product reliability, Bosch, Whirlpool, um, high-end manufacturing, technological leadership, 3M. These are all ways to differentiate. Um, We've already talked about value drivers. Also note when you guys, well, most of you are almost done with your schooling, but when you read your textbooks, one thing to note is very often the chapters might be written by different authors. So it's not uncommon that you're going to see definitions that are offered up again, and you look at it and you're like, why is this being talked about again when it was talked about before? But that's the answer. So in our value drivers, we had tangible and intangible sources of those. Um, So in the differentiation strategy, these are usually the value drivers. Um, Sustainable competitive advantages will relate to uh, something that can be driven, or the values driven by these. Oh, yeah, we're gonna fly through the rest of this. I just don't want to talk about this because I think it's actually going to screw you up more than it's going to help you. Um, oh, no, this is actually an interesting one. This is good information to know. um, if you're out there, especially if you like start a small business. So perceived value has a big impact on the differentiated strategy. Okay. Notice I said perceived, I didn't say reality. So it's important that you're discussing and trying to sell that value, how you're different, or that differentiation is important when the nature of the differentiation is subjective. Maybe there's a company that sells only blue doors and you are a red door. Blue doors are disgusting, or that's a dumb one. How about implements on a farm or a ranch? Okay. Um, John Deere is a green, obviously, implement. And if you talk to people that drive John Deere, they say, well, yeah, They don't break. They're the best out there. Talk to somebody else, they're going to tell you, no, it's subjective. It's like my Case IH doesn't break down any, more than your John Deere does. You just think it's that way. Okay. Well, there you have an environment where the quality or the value is subjective. Okay. Like it, love it, or hate it. So it doesn't make sense. Most people that buy John Deere's, households almost, that buy John Deere's are only ever going to buy John Deere. Okay. So if you're Case IH, guess what? You're not going to want to waste your time going after them. Okay. You're going to want to go after the rest of the people using different value drivers that are not related to what it is John Deere does best. Um, it's also highly effective when buyers are making a purchase for the first time, when you're not repurchasing the product or service over and over and over again, or buyers are unsophisticated. So when any of those are true, then you want to push the signal value because it's perceived value. Let's leave that one. One of the terms you might have heard is a niche market. Niche market, I used to think it was niche, but it's not. Niche, it's French, I guess, or something, it's a differentiated strategy. You're usually going after something that nobody else is going after. Um, microphone manufacturers. This is probably about my fifth microphone I've bought here, because it sounds the best. I ran it head to head. Um, the manufacturer of this microphone is, I can't think of the name. It's called a Yeti. But they've been making them for 15 years. If you were to go into a music studio, you would never see a microphone like this because it's got a USB plug on it. And they're manufactured basically to plug directly into a computer to make videos or record sound, like kind of like a podcast, or like, recording a class lecture or something like that. These aren't designed to be in a music studio. Well, that's a niche market. Okay. The people that are in recording studios do not want microphones like this. They want something that has a particular input, XLR input. I'm sure some of you can see my instrumental stuff. I have a little bit of a background in this. Uh, if the microphone in the studio does not have this three-prong XLR input, nobody in the studio wants the microphone, because where are they going to hook it up? It doesn't plug into a soundboard. So this is a niche market. Okay. You're going after people that are probably doing, well, 10 years ago it was a niche market. It was just people that wanted the microphone plugged into a laptop and everything was done, and you had a couple controls on the mic. Now yeah, I'm sure these guys have sold millions of these things. Um, I do kind of want to, oh, I don't like this. It's Canadian goose, Canada gooses. Um, if you've ever had a Canada goose jacket, I saw this 10 years ago because I was so sick of being cold all the time. And I went and shopped for, well, like, what's the best jacket you could get? And I found a Canadian Goose down jacket, which is about $1,000. So nobody in their right mind is going to buy, a jacket like this, other than people that go to Antarctica. Um, so that's a niche, focused, differentiated strategy. When they're selling this, it costs $1,000 to $1,500 to buy one of these jackets. Your average person in Canada, or North America, Northern North America, is not going to spend $1,000 or $1,500 on a jacket. So when they do that, it's a focused differentiation strategy. They're going after a certain subset. Now, once they planted that in there, they became well known as having the warmest jacket because it was genuine goose down, very light but very warm. You wouldn't, like, if you were in Missouri, you would not wear that as a winter jacket because you would roast in it. They went after that. Well, then it became famous for being known as that. Uh, and it ended up paying off because then you had more and more people like, no, I want a really warm jacket. And they said, well, where do you, I don't care how much I'm going to pay, I'll buy it. They went after this and kind of made him famous. Um, yeah, I'm, I think we're going to be done here. Most of this, again, is just deductive reasoning. Just as always, a reminder, competitive strategy should be well matched to the internal situation. Um, and it should be competitive. I don't know what else to say. Yep, we're going to stop there. Okay, got through that as fast as I could. Thank you for your patience. And now we're done with chapter 5, and hopefully we'll get into chapter 6. Have a great rest of your day.